You wake to the sound of dripping water. It is not the delicate kind that poets like to compare to pearls, but the monotonous hollow sort, each drop landing with a blunt thud in a shallow tin pan that you did not place there yourself. The water falls from the rotten edge of a beam above your sleeping space, and you have learned by now that it will continue whether you care or not. You lie still for a moment, wrapped in a wool blanket that smells faintly of mildew, and listen to the rhythm. It is slower than your heartbeat, but somehow more insistent. The cold is a thing that sits on your chest like a cat, heavy and unmoving. Your breath curls in the air, a thin mist that rises briefly before disappearing. There is no fire in the small brazier in the corner because you have no charcoal left, and because last night you chose to spend your coin on a chunk of bread and a small mug of thin ale. Fire keeps you warm for a few hours. Bread keeps you alive for a day. You sit up, pulling the blanket tighter around your shoulders, and your bare feet touch the uneven wooden planks of the floor. They feel damp because they are damp. Moisture lives here permanently, invited by the leaking roof and the thick stone walls that trap the cold instead of keeping it out. Your boots sit beside the bed, stiff from yesterday's rain, the leather hard enough that it will bite your ankles when you put them on. In the darkness, you can see the outline of your coat hanging from a nail on the wall. It is made of coarse wool dyed the color of weak tea, and the elbows are shiny from years of use. The lining is torn in several places, the stitching loosened by damp and by careless repairs you made yourself with uneven thread. This coat is your armor against the chill corridors of the building where you work, a place that is grand in name and miserable in truth. The first sound beyond your room is the shuffling of feet, a servant carrying a bucket of something heavy down the hallway. You hear a faint cough, the dry kind that sounds like it comes from deep within the ribs, and then the slam of a distant door. Someone mutters a curse, though not loud enough to draw the attention of the steward. You imagine the kitchen is already alive, with the clatter of pans, the smell of smoke, the hiss of grease spitting from a pan of fat. You will pass through there soon enough, because there is no other route to the practice room, and the kitchen is a kind of purgatory between your bed and your labor. The thought of labor draws a sour taste to your mouth. Today you will rehearse for the Lord's entertainment, which is to say, you will stand before a group of musicians and try to convince them to make something that resembles music. They will not thank you for the effort, and neither will the Lord, who cannot tell a lute from a viol and cares only that the sound flatters his pride. You push your feet into the boots, grimacing as the cold leather resists your toes, and you stand. The floorboards creak as you cross to the small wash basin. The water inside is half frozen, a thin crust of ice breaking under your touch. You splash your face, shivering as the shock of cold strips away the last of sleep. In the mirror, a small disc of polished metal hanging crooked on the wall, your face looks older than it should. The dark hair at your temples is streaked with gray, your skin lined from years of squinting at faded parchment scores by candlelight. Your breakfast, if you can call it that, is a small heel of bread you saved from last night. You chew slowly, not because you wish to savor it, but because you know there will be nothing else until evening. The bread is hard enough to scrape your gums, and the taste is mostly of stale flour and the faint must of the cloth it was wrapped in. When you open the door to the corridor, the air is somehow colder than in your room. The corridor is lit by one narrow slit of a window where pale winter light seeps in reluctantly. The stone floor beneath the thin reed mats is uneven, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Your own steps echo, though you try to tread softly, because noise here has a way of drawing attention you would rather avoid. You descend the narrow staircase, gripping the wooden rail polished by many hands. At the bottom, the kitchen yawns open before you, heat from the central hearth hitting your face like a wave. The warmth is welcome, but the smell is not. Smoke from wet logs, the sharp tang of onions, and something else, meat perhaps, though it has a sweetness that makes you uneasy. The cook barely glances at you. His eyes are red from smoke, his apron smeared with the grease of many days. You nod, because it is better to nod than to speak, and you cross the kitchen to the far door. Beyond it lies the hallway to the practice room, and beyond that, the rest of your day, the endless repetition, the fumbling fingers, the impatience of those who believe themselves your betters. You step through the doorway, and the cold greets you again, biting at your ears, settling in your bones. You think of the dripping water in your room, the stale bread, the smell of smoke, and you realize that all of it will happen again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, until the day it stops. The practice room is a long, narrow hall that smells of dust and sour wool. The windows are set high into the walls, narrow slits more for defense than for light, so the daylight arrives here pale and reluctant. You push the heavy door open and feel the uneven rush of air, colder near the stone wall, slightly warmer by the empty fireplace where no one has bothered to light a fire in days. Your musicians arrive in twos and threes, some rubbing their hands together, some yawning without the slightest attempt to hide it. One carries a viol that is missing its top string, another a recorder with a hairline crack running down the length of the wood. A few carry nothing at all, intending to borrow an instrument from the storeroom, though you know full well that half the instruments in there are unplayable. You greet them with the flat politeness you have cultivated over the years, because warmth wastes energy. They mumble in return, setting themselves into the mismatched chairs that form a lopsided semicircle around the conductor's stool. You sit, placing your own music on the stand, and glance over the opening notes. The ink has faded in places, the lines faint and almost unreadable, a copy made by an apprentice scribe who did not care enough to steady his hand. You raise your hand for the first note. It comes, but not as it should. The viol wails a half tone too low. The recorder squeals in protest. The sackbut player coughs into his sleeve, just as the downbeat lands. You stop them immediately, the sound dying into the cold air, like a wounded animal retreating into the dark. Again, you say. You do not need to raise your voice. They know the meaning of that word, and they obey, though slowly, as if each were dragging a cart of stones behind him. The second attempt is no better. The rhythm wavers, a slow sag in the middle of the bar, as if the music itself is tired of moving forward. You hear a wrong note, not just wrong in pitch, but wrong in spirit, so carelessly placed that you can almost see it lying sideways in the air. You stop them again. The sackbut player shrugs. The viol player stares at his shoes. The recorder player pretends to adjust his instrument. You know that none of them will apologize. Apologies are for those who believe improvement is possible. The morning drags on like this. You begin each passage with a fragile hope and end each one with the same dull certainty. It will not get better. You watch fingers slip on cold strings, lips dry and crack on the mouthpieces, eyes wander to the tiny window where a thread of pale light moves slowly across the wall. You think about the instruments themselves, warped wood that swells and shrinks with the damp, gut strings that fray after a few hours of play, reeds cut from river plants that taste faintly of mud. The lute player's thumb is bleeding where the edge of a string has cut him, but he plays on because the Lord expects a full complement of sound, even if it is ugly. By midday, the air in the room is thick with the smell of unwashed wool, old sweat, and damp leather. The chairs creak each time someone shifts his weight. Your voice grows hoarse from calling out corrections, though you know your corrections land on ears that have long stopped listening. You break briefly for food, though the word break is misleading. The bread they hand you is as dry as the parchment on your stand, and the thin broth tastes mostly of boiled water with a suggestion of turnip. The musicians chew slowly, not because they savor it, but because their teeth have grown cautious after years of hard crusts and gristle. When you resume, the light from the window has grown dimmer, and the temperature has fallen enough that you can see the faint cloud of your breath. The players hunch deeper into their coats and cloaks, their fingers stiff on the strings and keys. You try to lead them through the more delicate sections, but the cold has made delicacy impossible. The notes stumble like drunkards on a frozen street. By the final hour of rehearsal, you are not conducting so much as keeping the wreck from collapsing entirely. You lower your standards without announcing it. A phrase in the right key is good enough. A chord that is merely ugly rather than unbearable is a small victory. You count silently in your head, measuring the time left until you can dismiss them. When you do, they do not linger. Chairs scrape, cases close, boots shuffle across the wooden floor. A few nod to you in farewell, though more out of habit than respect. Soon you are alone in the room, the sound of their departure fading down the corridor. You sit for a moment longer, staring at the pages on your stand. The ink swirls and dots look less like music now, and more like some ancient script in a language you do not care to learn. You close the book and place it under your arm. Tomorrow will be another rehearsal, another slow erosion of your patience, another day of trying to build music out of wood, gut, and human frailty. The door creaks as you push it open. The corridor beyond smells faintly of damp stone and candle smoke. You hear voices somewhere down the hall, a laugh followed by the clink of a jug. The musicians are already losing themselves in ale and complaints. You envy them, though you know you will not join them. There is no point in dulling your senses when tomorrow will sharpen them again on the same grindstone. You make your way back towards your room, each step heavy, each corner of the building familiar to the point of contempt. The day's work is done, but the weight of it lingers, pressing against your ribs like an unwelcome hand. The hall looks magnificent only from a distance. Up close, the velvet curtains reveal bald patches where the pile has worn away, and the gilt on the carved cornices flakes like old pastry. Torches spit and hiss along the walls, adding a smoke that curls into your throat and makes you want to cough. A few braziers struggle to warm the vast room, their coals a dull red, their heat lost to the high wooden rafters that trap drafts like a net. You stand just beyond the edge of the tiled floor, your musicians assembled in a ragged crescent, and you feel a familiar pressure settle on your shoulders, a cloak that is heavier than wool and far less useful. The steward stalks along the aisle to remind you of the order of pieces, as if you could forget the sequence that he has changed twice already. He smells of vinegar and damp wool and the certainty of a man who does not have to play a single note. He holds a tablet with names and timings written in a sharp clerk's hand, and he taps the surface with one thick finger as if that will make you obey more quickly. You nod, because nodding is cheaper than speaking, and you return to your place. The nobility enters as if choreographed by boredom. Their boots brush the rushes, their rings catch the light and scatter it in dull gleams. The ladies rustle like the pages of an old book, perfume rising from their sleeves to fight the meat smell drifting from the sideboard. Laughter arrives in cautious bursts, quickly muffled, for no one wishes to laugh alone in this hall. The Lord himself takes his seat on the raised chair beneath a tapestry of a hunt frozen in wool, hounds forever leaping, stag forever fleeing, lives forever spared by bad embroidery. His face is the color of expensive wine and old anger. He has eaten well and slept poorly. You can always hear the latter in the way he clears his throat. You lift your hands. They are steady, though you do not feel steady. You feel the floor under your shoes, the ridge where two boards fail to meet neatly, and you fix upon that imperfection as if it were a friend. The first downbeat falls, and the musicians conjure sound from their tired wood and gut. For a brief moment, the notes gather into something like purpose. Then the hall asserts itself. A draft stabs through the windows, and the strings go shy of true. A cough blossoms in the front row, and the recorder player flinches. A lady adjusts her bracelets, and the small clatter arrives at the worst possible bar, as if metal were an instrument that had forced itself into your arrangement. You keep the pulse, it is your only reliable ally. You guide them past a treacherous cadence where the viol usually sags, and for once it holds. You dare to shape a phrase, to stretch the line just enough to resemble grace, and you feel a prick of warmth at the base of your throat that might once have been pride. It fades when the sackbut bell catches a torch draft and makes a small, defeated burble at the end of a sustained note. The player looks at you with eyes that say he is sorry, but also that he is tired of being sorry. Between pieces, the hall makes its own music. Knives scrape plates, spurs tick against chair legs. Somewhere behind the Lord, a servant winces as hot a fat kisses his wrist, and he swallows the sound, turning it into an uneven breath. You stand with your hands folded in front of you and wait for the steward's small nod. It is never a large nod. Large nods cost a man authority. The next piece is lighter, a pretense of gaiety for a room that distrusts joy. You begin, and the melody steps forward like a polite guest, bowing at the door. Halfway through, the Lord lifts his wine and speaks over the music to a visiting knight whose armor has been polished to a mirror that reflects nothing human. Your players hear the murmur and their hearts sag. Your hands do not. You push them through the figures. You hold the rhythm like a rope across a stream, and they cross without falling entirely in. At the pause, the steward is at your elbow again, his smile thin as the metal of a cheap coin. The lady with the lapdog wishes to hear a pavane she remembers from a winter feast many years ago. You do not have it prepared, of course, because no one told you that memory would be on tonight's program. The steward's smile asks whether you will be difficult. You return the smile with one of your own, the kind that says you will not, and you turn to your players with a look that has served you better than coin. Somehow they find their parts, or the shadow of their parts, and when you raise your hand, the pavane steps onto the floor with an old limp that almost reads as elegance. While you play, you watch the faces that watch you without seeing you. There is the Baron, whose lips move as he counts silently, though he has no sense of time. There is the lady who holds her lapdog as if it were a relic, her eyes small and bright and unforgiving. There is the priest who disapproves of music while tapping his finger in perfect time. There is the young page behind the Lord's chair who leans forward by the smallest degree whenever the melody tilts toward sadness, as if he has felt such tilting in his own chest and is surprised to hear it echoed. An hour passes in the slow way that hours always pass here. Your shoulders ache, your mouth tastes of smoke and old cloth. The recorder player bites too hard, and his reed squeals, a thin cry that cuts through the hall like a skewer. Laughter rises from the lower tables, and then falls when the Lord does not join it. You feel the blood go to your face, and you force it back down with the same will you use to hold a fugue together. The Lord signals for the mask. This is the part they pretend to enjoy because it resembles order. Servants draw the curtains aside at the far end of the hall to reveal a painted backdrop of a grove that no tree would recognize. Two dancers enter with faces powdered so pale they look like ghosts who have forgotten the way out. Your musicians must wrap their lines around the dancer's steps, and you must anticipate the moment when the right foot falters or the left knee sticks. You count the breath of the led dancer, not the music, because breath is the truer tempo. It works. The steps conclude where they ought to, and the Lord claps once, then twice, and others follow, relieved to have a command to obey. Someone important asks to see you. The steward flutters his fingers as if shooing a fly, and murmurs that you are to approach the dais. You walk the length of the hall with the instrument cases and the scuffed rushes and the disapproving torches bearing witness. The Lord's face is a mask carved from some expensive, uncooperative wood. He does not thank you. He asks whether you could not make the wind players less shrill, and the strings more warm, and the brass more noble, and the whole thing more pleasing. You say you will try, because that is the only answer that allows you to continue to eat. He waves you away with a gesture that would dismiss a cloud. Back with your musicians, you begin the final set. Fingers are slower now, lips are drier, the air is thicker, yet a strange calm arrives, a sense that humiliation has already happened and cannot happen again tonight, so the worst has been survived. The chorale that closes the evening starts like a cart on a rutted road and ends like a prayer spoken by someone who does not believe but continues out of habit. It is, in other words, honest. When the last note dies, it does not really die. It becomes smoke and joins the rest of the smoke. The nobility applaud with the soft, careful rhythm of people who worry that clapping too loudly will look vulgar. The Lord stands, and all stand, and the evening is declared a success because no one has the energy to declare otherwise. You pack slowly. You check each page, each strap, each cracked reed tucked into its cloth. Your players speak in low voices that release the pressure the music built and could not spend. You listen for anger and hear only fatigue. That is perhaps safer. In the corridor, the cold receives you like an old creditor. Your breath fogs before your face and then disappears as if it had been embarrassed to be seen. You walk the long passage back toward the practice room to store the instruments and the longer passage beyond toward your bed. The building settles around you with small groans. Somewhere, a rat considers your movement and chooses a different path. Somewhere, a candle gutters and dies without ceremony. You tell yourself that the performance is over. You tell yourself that the judgment of those seated beneath the tapestry matters less than the lines you kept intact. You tell yourself many such things as you climb the narrow stair, because words are cheaper than sleep and easier to find. At your door, you pause and listen. From inside, you hear nothing but the slow drip from the beam into the pan. The rhythm has not changed. It will mark the night as surely as you marked the evening. You set your hand on the latch and push. The room smells of damp wool and the absence of fire. You place your coat on the nail and stand for a moment in the dark. Your ears ring with a phantom chord, the one you meant to hear and did not. You wait for it to fade. It does not. You lie down in your clothes and pull the blanket over your chest and stare at the ceiling where you cannot see anything. Somewhere below, a servant laughs in a tired voice. Somewhere above, a draft finds a new gap and begins the patient work of enlarging it. You close your eyes and think of breath, that truer tempo, and you count it as if it belonged to someone you might yet forgive. The morning after the performance, the air in the corridor outside your room feels even colder, as if the walls themselves disapprove of last night and have decided to punish you for it. You walk stiffly because the damp in your bones has stiffened your joints, and you follow the same worn path toward the practice room. But today is not for rehearsal. Today is for errands, requests, and the kind of duties that no one lists in the fine titles attached to the post of Kapellmeister. In the kitchen, the cook greets you with a scowl, not for anything you have done personally, but because the brass player spilled a cup of ale over a basket of onions during the celebration after the performance. It is apparently your responsibility to control the behavior of your musicians at all hours. You nod at the accusations without defending yourself. To argue is to invite a longer speech. To agree is to make it end faster. The cook waves you away with a greasy hand, muttering about the cost of onions as though each were carved from silver. In the storage alcove behind the practice room, you find the instruments in the same state you left them, tired, chipped, strings slackened to keep them from snapping in the cold. You begin the slow work of checking each one, not because anyone will thank you for it, but because you know the Lord's steward will appear without warning and demand to know why the sackbut mouthpiece smells of rust, or why the recorder plays a note too high when the weather is wet. You clean the reeds with a cloth, running your fingers over the wood to feel for cracks you cannot see. The viol's bridge leans slightly forward, the sign of a player too impatient to tune carefully. You fix it without comment. The first interruption comes from a page barely into his second decade, who delivers a message with the air of someone dropping a stone into your meal. The Lord wishes you to prepare a piece that will mock a visiting rival. The rival is to be honored in public, but the music should include subtle dissonances that will be noticed only by those who understand such things, which the Lord assures you is enough to cause offense where offense is deserved. You understand perfectly well what is being asked, a melody that pretends to flatter while quietly poisoning the air. You agree without question. Refusal is not a choice. By midday, you are in the great hall, not performing, but pretending to tune while keeping one ear on the conversation at the high table. The Lord and his advisers speak of land disputes and grain shortages, though they also speak of whose wife wore which color and whose son drinks too much wine at too early an hour. The steward catches your eye at one point and tilts his head toward a narrow side door. You obey. Behind that door, the air is cooler and darker. This is where servants pass, carrying trays, barrels, and gossip. You are told to delay the evening's music by just a little so that the Lord's speech can land more heavily on the ears of the guests. A little in this place means enough to leave the musicians cold, fingers numbed, patience worn away before the first note. You nod again. You have long since given up asking for specifics. Later, in the shadow of the stairwell, you overhear a quarrel between two of your players. The lute player accuses the viol player of drinking more ale than his share after last night's performance. The viol player responds by questioning the lute player's ability to keep time sober or drunk. Their voices rise, and you step between them before the argument spills into the hallway. You do not raise your voice. You simply remind them that the steward hears everything and remembers everything, and that losing one's position in winter is more than an inconvenience. They fall silent, though their eyes still speak in unplayed chords. In the evening, the performance for the smaller audience begins in a side chamber lit by a few sputtering candles. You are asked to play a short piece while the Lord entertains his closest friends. Halfway through, one of those friends makes a crude joke about your appearance. The others laugh. You smile thinly, because to do otherwise would make you memorable in the wrong way. The joke is not clever, and it is not new. The only thing new about it is the voice that delivers it, and voices do not last long here. After the guests leave, you are summoned again, not to perform, but to write a short arrangement for the steward's niece, who wishes to try her hand at the harp. She will not practice enough to learn it, and the parchment will likely end up as a wrapping for spiced nuts in the kitchen, but the request is phrased as a command. You sit at the desk in the steward's office, scratching notes by candlelight, while your stomach reminds you that you missed the evening meal. The final insult of the day comes in the form of your pay, or rather, the lack of it. The steward explains that the coin will arrive next week, and that for now you may take your compensation in the form of a small bag of barley flour. You take it without a word. You know better than to mention that barley flour will not pay the bootmaker, and that the bootmaker's patience is thinner than the soles of your boots. When you return to your room, you pass the kitchen again. The cook gives you the kind of look that could sour cream. You suspect that whatever offense your musicians committed last night has grown in the telling until it is now a saga of ruin and waste. You do not stop to correct the details. In truth, it does not matter. In a place like this, offense is a form of currency. Some pay it, some spend it, some hoard it. You have learned to carry it quietly in your coat pocket. In your room, you pour a little of the barley flour into the basin and mix it with water. It makes a paste that passes for food. You eat it without ceremony, without hope of pleasure, simply to keep the hunger from sharpening further. The sound of dripping water from the beam above feels louder tonight, though you know it is the same as always. You lie back, the taste of damp flour still on your tongue, and close your eyes. In the darkness, you think about the errands, the orders, the small humiliations that threaded themselves through the day like notes in a melody no one would choose to play. You wonder if tomorrow will be any different. The answer arrives before you finish asking the question. It will not. The days here are all variations on the same theme, and you are both player and prisoner in its endless performance. Night in the building arrives not with peace, but with exhaustion that looks like peace to a distant eye. You have put away the last instrument, tied the final cracked case with a cord that threatens to snap, and nodded to the last servant who still has tasks to finish before he may sleep. The corridor smells of ash and boiled cabbage, and the floor feels as if it stores the day's footsteps and returns them slowly, one creak at a time. You carry no lamp. You know the route by the particular sound each board makes, by the draft that always slips from the same broken pane, by the lump of mortar that your boot toe nudges at the turn of the stair. Your room greets you with the thin breath of its own damp. You set your coat on the nail as if returning a banner after a battle that no one will record. The pan beneath the leaking beam is half full. You pour the water into a cracked earthen jar and set the pan back exactly where it was. Precision feels like pity for yourself, and you find it soothing. You sit on the edge of the bed. The straw inside the mattress shifts in a slow hiss, like a tired audience that has forgotten to complain. You list the day backward, the way a monk might unthread prayers on a cord. The steward's grin, the mockery in the small room with too much perfume, the quarrel broken in the stair shadow, the message about the flattering insult to be set to music, the kitchen scowl about onions that were drowned as if onions could swim, the morning's chill, the memory of the hall with its torches that hissed like small, angry geese, the noble faces like coins that have survived too many hands, the sound of breath that guided the dancers more than any drum could have done. You let each scene stand in your mind like a figure in a doorway and then let it pass. There is a heel of bread left. You consider eating it now, and you do not. You set it on the shelf and cover it with a cloth, though you know that cloth will not turn it into anything more than what it is. You drink from the jar, and the water tastes faintly of the wood it has run across and of the pan that kept it. You have known worse tastes, you have known better ones too, but that knowledge does not help. From somewhere outside, a dog howls once, then twice, then stops, as if the reason for the howl has been removed rather than satisfied. A bell rings in the distance, not the large bell, the small one, the one that is rung when someone cannot sleep and wants the time to know it cannot either. The sound takes the stairs in slow paces, reaches your room, looks around, and leaves. The walls return to their soft, damp silence. You lie down without undressing. The blanket pulls across your chest with the weight of wet cloth, though it is dry. You stare at the dark place where the ceiling would be if there were enough light to see it. You count your breaths to persuade yourself you are still a creature who can be persuaded. The count steadies you. It is the only count that does. Accounts owed and accounts promised do not respond to numbers in the way breath does. Thought wanders to the early days, the ones you no longer claim as youth because the word suggests a softness that never belonged to you. You remember a teacher with a gentle cruelty who made you play scales until your fingers felt like badly carved pegs. He said that discipline would carry you where talent could not. You have carried that phrase for years, like a loaf that is never fresh, always edible. It has not proved false. It has not made anything sweet. You turn onto your side. The blanket snags on the rough weave of your sleeve. In the next room, a mouse performs some private ceremony of theft. You picture it carrying a crumb 3 times larger than its head, a victor with a prize that will not feed a family. You feel a solidarity you do not extend to people. There is a knock, not on your door, a door far away down the corridor, then soft footfalls, a whisper that carries the weight of a name without giving the name away. The castle, the manor, the building whatever it wishes to call itself in the language of lords, never truly sleeps. It only changes the shift of its fears. In daylight, the fears are public, embroidered into banners, sealed with wax. In the night, they are private, carried in mouths and hands that tremble only when the torches are low. You consider the word dignity and place it on your tongue like a seed you are not sure you wish to plant. You are a Kapellmeister, a master by title, and yet your mastery serves whatever purpose is nearest. You cue a flourish to mask a cough. You stretch a measure to suit a speech. You salt a melody with contempt for ears that will drink it and never taste the sting. The craft remains. The craft is honest even when the use of it is not. You hold to that as a rope whose other end is knotted around something you cannot see. Perhaps it is tied to a post sunk in firm earth. Perhaps it trails into a river. Sleep does not arrive. You do not invite it. You rehearse a score in your mind that no one has asked you to write. In it, there is a line for breath alone, marked by rests that are not silent so much as honest about their emptiness. There is a line for rust, a slow, patient ostinato. There is a line for water that drips, always the same pitch, always the same interval of time between drops, a tyrant of modest means. There is a line for hunger, which is not a drum, but behaves like one, returning predictably, leading the procession of your hours. You give yourself the smallest smile and deny it attendance. Memory pulls you into the moment when you first understood that the body is an instrument and that the world is a poor luthier. Cold warps wood, damp swells it, heat dries it so quickly that cracks appear where the grain runs truest. The strings are gut taken from creatures that never consented. They stretch and eventually surrender. You tune and tune again, and one day you discover you have been tuning your life to rooms that will never be warm, to faces that will never listen, to weather that arrives already decided. You are not heroic. The word is a costume and it does not fit. You are not tragic either. That word presumes a stage and an audience that understands how to sit in the dark. You are ordinary in a way that history usually trims out of its stories. That is precisely why you are worth remembering, you tell yourself, and you hear the self persuasion as clearly as the mouse hears the crumb. When sleep at last sighs and steps closer, you resist just long enough to speak to it without words. You tell it that tomorrow it will arrive with the same treads on its boots, the same weight in its pockets. You will wake. You will pull on the coat with the shiny elbows. You will thread the corridor past a kitchen where someone curses onions for crimes they never committed. You will lift your hand, and men with tired faces will attempt to turn wood and gut and breath into something that does not offend. The noble faces will hover again like the moons of a system that does not believe in gravity. The steward will find new uses for your craft and will call them small favors. All of it will happen again, and the repetition will be the point rather than the problem. You think about leaving, as you do sometimes when the night forgets to pin your limbs down. Leave for where and with what? The road requires shoes. The next town requires letters, or charm, or a stomach for selling your skill in a market where dogs eat better than players. You imagine the road anyway. It is long, wet, and honest. It does not pretend to be anything but what it is. You pay it the respect of not lying to yourself about it. You will not take the road. You will stay. You will work. There is a dignity in staying when there is no applause for staying. There is also resignation. The two share a bed and pretend they do not. The drip resumes its counting. One drop, then another, each a small thesis on gravity. You breathe in time with it, then against it, then beside it. The bell rings again, a smaller sound this time, as if even time has grown weary of hearing itself declared. You are hardly awake and hardly asleep, and between those two states, a thought appears as bare and exact as winter. The music that remains when the hall is empty is the music you have truly made. It is not recorded, not paid for, not applauded. It is the careful way you set the pan to catch the leak. It is the way you steady your hand so the players see steadiness even when they do not hear it. It is the way you touch a cracked reed and feel the crack as a promise that still permits a note. You close your eyes. A soft tiredness spreads outward from your ribs, as if your body has finally agreed to pretend to be safe. You imagine a small fire that does not exist, and you imagine placing your hands near it. The hands are not steady, but they are not empty. In the distance, someone laughs, a low, private sound, the kind that expresses no joy and yet refuses to admit defeat. You borrow that laugh and file it, where you keep the few things that do not harm you. Before sleep takes you entirely, you promise nothing. Promises are another instrument that break when the weather changes. You accept instead. Acceptance is not grace. It is a working garment. It is the coat with shiny elbows, newly mended, serviceable for another season that has already begun. Tomorrow you will wake to the same cold, the same pan, the same corridor. You will count the breath that is yours to count. You will take your place before the men whose faces you could draw in darkness. You will raise your hands. You will begin, and the day will proceed like a hymn sung by believers who doubt and doubters who still sing, because the tune survives where the words do not.